Ever been told you don't belong because you're too different? Imagine being labeled too urban in the world of high fashion, only to rise, defy every expectation, and close Paris Fashion Week. Ready to hear how she turned rejection into the moment of a lifetime? She had always dreamed of Paris, not just the city of lights and romance, but the city that stood as the undisputed heart of high fashion. For years, she sketched designs in her cramped apartment, her fingers stained with fabric dye and ink, fueled by a vision that was bold, fresh, and unapologetically hers. Her style was a fusion, the vibrant pulse of the streets she grew up in, woven with the elegance of haute couture. She called it urban luxe. But when she sent her portfolio to Paris Fashion Week, the answer came swift and brutal. Too urban, they said. Not what we're looking for. It wasn't just a rejection, it was a dismissal, an erasure, a subtle way of saying, your style doesn't fit into our world. Imagine the sting. The moment your biggest dream is crushed by words you never saw coming, but she refused to let those words define her. Instead, they ignited a fire. She was determined to prove that urban was not a limitation. It was a culture, a movement, and a story that deserved to be told on the grandest stage. She spent nights studying the greats, not to imitate, but to understand the game she was about to change. Each stitch, each sketch became a statement, a challenge to the fashion elite who said she didn't belong. Her designs weren't just clothes, they were a voice for those who felt unseen, unheard. Her friends warned her, Paris is a different world. They want tradition, not street style. But she knew the world was shifting. Voices once silenced were rising. The industry was thirsty for authenticity, for innovation, for her. This was the beginning of a journey filled with doubt, struggle, and relentless passion. Because she wasn't just designing dresses, she was designing a future where style had no limits, no borders, no labels. And Paris, well, Paris was about to find out exactly what urban really meant. When the rejection letter arrived, it felt heavier than she expected. She read the words again, as if maybe this time they would sound different. But no, the message was clear. Your designs don't fit our aesthetic. That cold phrase echoed in her mind, repeating like a cruel refrain. Not just a no, but a dismissal of everything she believed in. She sat there, portfolio in hand, heart pounding with frustration and disbelief. How could the world's biggest fashion stage say she didn't belong? How could they reject the very essence of who she was? The streets, the culture, the stories woven into every seam. For a moment, doubt crept in like a shadow. Was she really too different, too urban to be accepted by the elite? Was her dream just a beautiful illusion? The rejection wasn't just a professional setback. It felt like a personal attack on her identity and her art. But deep inside, a small voice whispered something stronger. This is not the end. That night, instead of folding under the weight of rejection, she stayed up until dawn, sketching feverishly. Every line was sharper, every detail more purposeful. The rejection had sparked a fierce determination. She wasn't going to shrink or apologize for her style. She was going to amplify it. She poured herself into her work like never before, blending bold colors, edgy textures, and street-inspired designs with a refined elegance that no one could ignore. Each piece was a message, a refusal to be silenced. She shared her journey on social media, raw and unfiltered, connecting with people who felt marginalized or overlooked. Her authenticity resonated. The likes and comments poured in, and suddenly she wasn't alone. There was a growing tribe of supporters who believed in her vision. Still, the path ahead was daunting. The fashion industry was steeped in tradition and exclusivity. Doors closed quickly, and the whispers of "too urban" followed her everywhere. But now those words had lost their power because she had a secret weapon: resilience. This was her fight, her moment to prove that fashion could be bold, inclusive, and revolutionary. Rejection was just the first step in a journey that would change everything. She realized something crucial. This wasn't just about her designs anymore. It was bigger, much bigger. It was about a culture that had long been sidelined, misunderstood, and misrepresented. She wasn't just creating clothes. She was creating a movement. Her vision blended the raw energy of urban streets with the sophistication of high fashion, a fearless celebration of Black culture, individuality, and unapologetic identity. Every piece she designed told a story of struggle, triumph, and unshakable pride. She knew these stories needed to be seen and heard on the biggest platforms. But how do you build a movement when the gatekeepers have their doors firmly shut? She turned to the digital world, where creativity and authenticity thrive beyond the confines of traditional fashion houses. Instagram became her runway, TikTok her stage. Her designs caught fire online. Young creatives, artists, and fashion lovers from around the world were drawn to her bold style, her honest voice, her refusal to conform. Suddenly, she wasn't just a designer, she was a symbol, a beacon for those who'd been told their style was too urban, too loud, or too different to fit into the polished world of fashion. She showed them what urban luxe really meant, a fusion of culture, power, and beauty that refused to be boxed in. Her followers grew into a loyal tribe, influencers, models, musicians, and everyday people who resonated with her authenticity. They shared her work, styled her pieces, and celebrated her message. Hashtags trended. Interviews followed. The buzz was undeniable. Still, it wasn't without challenges. Industry insiders whispered, "She's a fad." Critics scoffed, "Streetwear can't be haute couture." But she met every doubt with fierce determination, turning criticism into momentum, negativity into fuel. This movement wasn't just about fashion trends. It was about changing the narrative, about opening eyes to the vibrant, dynamic cultures shaping style today, about breaking down walls so that future designers wouldn't be told they were too urban, because the world would finally see that urban was incredible. And so with every stitch, every post, and every show she dreamed of, she built something unstoppable, a revolution that was ready to take Paris Fashion Week by storm. Just when the road seemed impossible, the call came. It was unexpected, almost surreal. A voice on the other end said the words she'd been dreaming of but dared not believe. "We'd like to invite you to showcase your collection at a special event linked to Paris Fashion Week." For a moment, she sat frozen. Was this real? Was it a mistake? After months of rejection, whispers, and doubt, this felt like a crack in the fortress that had kept her out. The invitation wasn't for the main runway, not yet, but it was a foot in the door, a chance to prove that the so-called too urban designer had a place at the table. The weight of that moment was immense. This was more than an opportunity, it was a challenge. Could she rise to it? Could she take her movement from the margins to the spotlight? She threw herself into preparation with a fierce determination. Every detail mattered, from the selection of fabrics to the choreography of the show. This was her moment to shatter every stereotype and expectation. Behind the scenes, the nerves crept in. Doubts whispered in her ear. What if they still saw her as an outsider? What if the crowd wasn't ready? But she pushed the fear aside and focused on what had brought her here. Her unwavering belief in her vision and her culture. Word began to spread among her supporters. Social media lit up with excitement and encouragement. The community she'd built rallied behind her, knowing this wasn't just a showcase, it was a statement. When the day finally arrived, the venue buzzed with energy. Industry insiders, journalists, and influencers gathered, curious about this rising star who dared to blend streetwear and luxury on one stage. As the first model stepped out wearing her bold, vibrant designs, a hush fell over the crowd. This wasn't just fashion. It was a declaration, a celebration of identity, resilience, and change. The so-called too urban designer was here, and she was impossible to ignore. That invitation was more than a chance. It was a turning point, the beginning of a new chapter where her voice would not only be heard but celebrated. The lights dimmed. The music surged through the room like electricity. All eyes were on the runway, and on her. This was more than a debut. It was a statement. The too urban designer who had been dismissed, doubted, and sidelined was now standing at the center of Paris Fashion Week's most talked about event. From the very first model striding down the catwalk, jaws dropped. Her collection was raw and refined, edgy yet elegant, a daring fusion of street culture and high fashion that commanded attention. Bold splashes of color collided with sleek silhouettes. Graffiti-inspired prints met shimmering silks. Sneakers glided alongside heels. It was a revolution in fabric and form. The crowd was stunned. Fashion editors whispered, influencers snapped photos furiously, and the industry's elite leaned in, unable to look away. Here was something new, fresh, authentic, and undeniably powerful. She watched from backstage, heart pounding. Every gasp, every murmur of approval was a victory. Each step on that runway was a crack in the old guard's fortress, a blow against the narrow definitions of what fashion should be. The energy was electric. Cameras flashed as models brought her vision to life, telling stories of resilience, culture, and unapologetic identity with every thread. She wasn't just showing clothes, she was reclaiming space that had long been denied. Word spread quickly. By the end of the night, social media exploded with praise. Headlines called her the breakout star, a breath of fresh air, the designer redefining fashion's future. Suddenly, the industry couldn't ignore her anymore. Yet amid the applause, she remained grounded. This moment was huge, but it was only the beginning. She knew the road ahead was still full of obstacles. There would be skeptics, detractors, and more barriers to break. But for the first time, she wasn't just fighting for acceptance. She was inspiring a movement, lighting a path for others who had been told they didn't belong. As the final model disappeared backstage, the crowd erupted into applause. She had arrived, and in doing so, she had shifted the landscape of fashion forever. The fashion world can be ruthless. For years, she'd heard the whispers, the doubts, the thinly veiled dismissals. Too urban, not refined enough, a passing trend. But now the very critics who once wrote her off were scrambling to understand her impact. It started with cautious praise in glossy magazines, hesitant at first, like dipping a toe into uncharted waters. Bold, they said. Innovative, they admitted. Slowly, headlines shifted from skepticism to admiration. The same voices that dismissed her before now called her a trailblazer, a visionary who dared to disrupt fashion's stale conventions. But it wasn't just the critics who changed. The industry insiders who had kept the gates closed began reaching out, not just with compliments, but with offers, invitations to exclusive shows, collaborations with established brands. The kind of doors that had once seemed permanently locked were opening one by one. She could have basked in the glow of sudden acceptance, but she stayed true to her roots. Every deal, every partnership was carefully chosen to amplify her message, not dilute it. She wanted to bring others along, to make sure her success wasn't just personal, it was communal. Fans, both old and new, flooded her social media with messages of support and gratitude. Young designers, artists, and creatives who'd felt invisible finally saw themselves reflected in her work. She had become a symbol of possibility, proof that barriers could be broken and labels rewritten. Yet she never forgot the sting of rejection, the nights spent wondering if she'd ever belong. That memory kept her grounded and hungry. She used it as a reminder to keep pushing boundaries, to keep challenging the status quo. Her journey was no longer just about fashion. It was about changing an entire narrative, about inclusion, representation, and the power of authenticity. The doubters had become fans, but more importantly, she had become a force that could no longer be ignored. And as the spotlight grew brighter, she knew her story was only just beginning. The air was thick with anticipation. Paris Fashion Week had never seen a finale quite like this. When the announcement came that she would close the entire show, the room buzzed with disbelief, then excitement. The too urban designer, once dismissed and overlooked, was now entrusted with the most coveted spotlight of the entire event. Backstage, the tension was palpable. Models prepped, Stylists hurried, and she stood quietly, heart racing but focused. This wasn't just another runway walk. This was her declaration, the moment to show the world exactly who she was, what she represented, and why her voice mattered. The lights dimmed, music swelled, a pounding beat that echoed the city streets she loved, the culture she embodied. Then one by one, her models stepped onto the runway, each look more powerful than the last. The crowd was captivated, drawn into a story told through fabric and movement, a story of resilience, pride, and revolution. And then, the final walk. She stepped out herself, every eye locked on her. The city of lights felt like it had narrowed to this single moment. She wore her signature design, bold, fearless, and elegant, a perfect symbol of her journey. As she walked, the applause started softly, then grew into a roaring wave that shook the room. Critics, insiders, and fashion lovers rose to their feet, celebrating not just a show, but a statement that fashion could be inclusive, diverse, and boundary-breaking. This wasn't just the end of a runway, it was the beginning of a new era. Her closing the show was a victory, a message to every designer who had ever been told they didn't fit, every artist who'd ever been silenced. She wasn't just a designer anymore. She was a trailblazer, a pioneer, a voice for those who had been waiting for their chance. As the final notes played and the curtains fell, she knew this moment would be remembered, not just for the stunning designs, but for the power behind them. She had arrived, and Paris Fashion Week would never be the same again. The lights dimmed on the runway, but her story was just beginning to shine brighter than ever before. Closing Paris Fashion Week wasn't just a personal victory, it was a seismic shift in the world of fashion. She had shattered barriers, redefined beauty, and, most importantly, reclaimed a narrative that had long excluded voices like hers. In the weeks that followed, her inbox flooded with offers, collaborations, and requests for interviews. But beyond the glamour, the real triumph lay in what she inspired. A new generation of designers, artists, and dreamers who finally saw themselves reflected in the high fashion mirror. Her success wasn't a lucky break. It was the result of relentless passion, unshakable resilience, and a refusal to let the world's narrow definitions limit her. She had transformed Too Urban from a label meant to exclude into a badge of honor, a powerful statement of identity, culture, and innovation. Fashion critics who once doubted her now hailed her as a visionary. But she remained humble, knowing that the runway was just one step on a much larger journey. She was committed to lifting others up, to creating spaces where diverse voices could thrive without apology or compromise. Her story became a beacon, a reminder that creativity knows no boundaries, and that true style is about authenticity, courage, and heart. From street corners to haute couture, she bridged worlds, proving that fashion could be a force for inclusion and change. Years from now, when people look back at Paris Fashion Week, they won't just remember the glitz and glamour. They'll remember the moment when a designer who was once called too urban closed the show, and in doing so, opened the door for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. Her legacy was clear. She didn't just break the mold, she built a whole new one. And as she stood on that stage, surrounded by cheers and flashes, she knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning of a revolution that would reshape fashion forever. And that's how she transformed every doubt, every no, into a thunderous yes, proving that true style isn't about fitting in, but standing out. Her journey is a reminder. When you own your story, you don't just break barriers, you build legacies. What's your next move?